Okay, guys, we're heading into Hinduism and Buddhism now. And as we do so, you'll notice that the study guide has all of the lecture notes coming from Buddhism. So we've got it divided into two sections here, Buddhism I and Buddhism II. Let's roll with Buddhism I and lay some foundations. Before we begin looking at the study guide itself, I think it'd be helpful if we look at the mother religion very briefly of Buddhism, which is Hinduism. The Buddha, as far as we know, was born into a rather aristocratic family. His mother was purported to have had a dream while she was still pregnant with him, and placing a lot of importance on those dreams, she went to see a soothsayer, a dream interpreter. And that person said, well, based on what you're telling me, I think that the child that is to be born will either be a great military, political, or religious figure. Now, we talked today about sheltered lives, but the Buddha really lived a very sheltered life. His father really did not want him to be a religious leader when he grew up. He wanted him to be an aristocrat, a king, royalty. So he gave him a very sheltered life. And in that life, he would have been exposed to the idea of reincarnation or samsara. And reincarnation said that that people were born at a particular stage in life, a particular caste, and their responsibility once they were born in that caste was, as this picture illustrates, was to live out the duties and responsibilities of that caste to the best of their ability and to accumulate good karma. And once they died, they would then be reincarnated because of that good karma in a higher caste. And then the responsibilities would be very similar. They would live out the duties and responsibilities that they had in that caste as family members, fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, so forth. And as this picture illustrates, they would eventually die, and because of the accumulation of that good karma, they would hopefully be reborn in a higher caste. And the way that you made progress through Hinduism was through fulfilling the responsibilities of your caste. Well, this is what the Buddha grew up with. And not only did he grow up with this, but because he lived in that sheltered life that his father had crafted for him, he married and had a child. But then, as the legend goes, he was out one day and he saw four things that day that deeply troubled him. As this picture or painting illustrates, the four passing sights that he saw were an old, decrepit man, a diseased person, a family grieving over the loss of a loved one, and a Hindu hermit, a Hindu holy man. Seeing these four things on this day or over this period of time caused him to begin to question a lot of things. You could really say in many ways that he was developing critical thinking for the first time in his life, as he was now starting to say, what part of this Hinduism that I grew up with is going to be really mine? Well, he did what most folks did. He associated himself with a Hindu holy man, and he was very faithful in following up the teachings of that Hindu holy man, but he wasn't satisfied. So as this particular photo illustrates, he went to the extremes. You can see the contrast between this Chihuahua and this Great Dane in terms of size. Well, that's sort of what the Buddha did. He went first to the Hindu holy man, and he lived out that life. And he had already lived out the Great Dane life, so to speak, of royalty and privilege. And in neither place was he satisfied. In neither place did he find the answers to those questions that he was looking for. Instead, that enlightenment or that Buddhahood came one day after serving for several years in a variety of Hindu situations, and he was sitting under a tree, and there he received his enlightenment, and he really saw life as it really was. He really came to understand it. Now that we've laid that foundation, let's talk very briefly about the three situations, three realities that Buddha came upon. And this, by the way, is on your study guide. The first characteristic that he saw of life was that of anicca, A-N-I-C-C-A, or impermanence or change. You'll notice that this particular photograph has a "Will you marry me?" carved into the sand. Well, the tide isn't too far away, and eventually that will be washed away. And that's what the Buddha saw with life. He saw that there was really nothing permanent, no matter what you hung the hat of your life, so to speak, upon. You were always going to be struggling with the fact that there was nothing really permanent. No one, no building, no animals, no cities, nothing was permanent. So no matter how hard you tried to resist it, change was going to happen. Second thing that he saw was that of dukkha, or suffering. He saw that suffering abounded, that it was seen in every situation. Sometimes it was physical suffering, sometimes emotional suffering. There were different kinds, as we'll see in just a moment. But he saw that suffering was very indicative of the human existence, whether it be the poorest man or the richest man. And finally, in contrast to his Hindu upbringing, the Buddha would come to assert that there is no human soul, though there may very well be reincarnation. There is no human soul or jiva that transfers from one life to the other. So there's an absence of a permanent identity or soul or anatta. Well, all of these things led him to discover what he called the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are the foundation of Buddhism. The first one is that life is full of suffering. It does not mean that life is suffering, but it means that life is full of suffering. And the Buddha would identify at least three different kinds of suffering. The first is physical suffering, as with this woman who is suffering from a disease here, or perhaps if we are in our homes and we get up in the middle of the night to go use the restroom and we stub our toe on a bedside table or a dresser leg. That physical suffering is very, very real and very indicative of human life. But there's also a second kind of suffering. That is the suffering that comes from being too attached to something in which we find pleasure, and then when it slips away or it goes away, then we suffer the pain of change. Perhaps we have had a romantic relationship, or perhaps we've had a job, or perhaps we've had our own car, or this type of thing, or perhaps we've enjoyed friendships throughout school and in our neighborhood. Well, when we move, or when certain individuals move away, or when we lose that job, or we trade that car in, or that car is wrecked, then we suffer the pain of the absence of that thing which brought us pleasure. Ironically, there's also a third kind of suffering, and he identifies it as conditioned states. He says, sometimes we think, if only I could be married, if only I could be out of school, if only I could be in a relationship. And so we condition our happiness or our pleasure upon the presence of those conditioned states. And the Buddha would say, look, if nothing is permanent, then you're going to be suffering if you focus in on this if only. So he would say if everything in life has the potential for bringing us some type of suffering, then we need to understand the cause of that suffering. And that suffering is caused by people's wants. The Buddha might say that it's caused by greed, or better yet, that it's caused by insatiable desire or thirst, what is known as tanha. He says, look, we know that life is broken. We know that it's not the way it should be. And the real reality is that that dislocation is oftentimes found in that insatiable desire for private fulfillment or for what's right for us. As this photo illustrates, and as the caption below it suggests, suffering oftentimes originates not so much from the situation we find ourselves in, but rather we're constantly dissatisfied. We want something we can't have. And then when we do have what we have, we're never satisfied. Now he says some of those cravings or desires are fundamental to life: food, sleep, clothing, housing, the basic necessities of life. We can't get away from that. But he said some of them are very subtle. They're very much part of our lives, but we don't pay much attention to them. Things like privacy, friendship, quiet, respect, security, variety, and beauty. Each of those is subjective. Some of us tend to emphasize it more than others. But then there are those things that are socially conditioned. Those are the things that our society, our peers, our group of friends tell us is important. For example, you'll notice that alcohol is listed here. If I were to come and invite you to a party, and I want you to say, I said, it's going to be the party of all parties. We're going to have music and dancing and great food. Everybody's going to have a great time. Now, I'll only ask that you do one thing. I'm not asking that you bring anything. I'm just asking for this one thing. If you will do this one thing, we'll have a great party. Please neither consume alcohol before you come, nor please do not bring any alcohol with you. We're not serving any alcohol there. Question: how many of you would not come to my party because there is no alcohol being served, and I've asked you not to consume before you come? So you see, that is a socially conditioned situation that says that if the alcohol is consumed or is flowing freely, then we'll probably have a much better party. For the third noble truth is that suffering ends if people stop wanting things. In other words, if you stop the craving, you stop the suffering. Stop the craving, you stop the suffering. And so in many ways what the Buddha is saying here is that what we should do is aim less for happiness and more for inner peace, where it's not so much driving and ambitious about having that perfect car, that perfect home, that perfect relationship, that perfect job, but rather learning to be content with what we do have, and in that finding that inner peace, and being less concerned about those outside things that will bring us happiness. And so the essence of the truth here with this third noble truth is simply this: we can't change what other people do, say, or think. The only thing we can change is how we experience the world and how we react to it. And that's what the Buddha is really asking for in this third noble truth. And of course, if suffering can be stopped by stopping the craving, then the question rises, well, how do we stop the craving? And that leads us to the eightfold path. So the fourth noble truth is we can stop the craving if we will follow and practice the eightfold path. Notice that within Buddhism, what the Buddha was offering was nirvana. You'll see this extinction of this candle here in this picture. What the Buddha was saying was simply this: as Hindus, we've been raised to believe that our dharma, our responsibility, is to live out the responsibilities of our caste to the best of our knowledge and ability, and to develop good karma. And that means that because samsara or reincarnation is present, that means that in the next life we'll come back in a higher caste. What is unique about the Buddha's message is he is saying you can get off the wheel of reincarnation at the end of this life. You don't have to be reborn in another life form. You can stop the wheel at the end of this life. No more craving, no more suffering, nirvana. Okay? So this is a different way of looking at it from his Hindu counterparts and the Hindu religion. So really the Eightfold Path is a treatment by training. Just as much as this woman is talking about core exercises, developing the stomach muscles here, that's essentially and metaphorically what the Buddha is saying. He is saying, look, the same thing applies for this getting off the wheel of samsara. This is a treatment by training. If you want it, you can have it, but you're going to have to be diligent and be willing to pay everything for it. So in a lot of ways, this ties in with what the Buddha said about life. He said there are two ways that you can live life. One of it is to live randomly, and that's so often how many people live their lives, bumping like balls in a pinball machine from one bumper to another, being affected by circumstances and conditions and cravings. But the Buddha said there's a different way of living life, and that is the diligent way, the striving for nirvana, the disciplined way. And that's what the Buddha is offering. So the question arises then, what should you do first? If you think that the Four Noble Truths have some merit and you want to get off of the cycle of reincarnation, what should you do first? Well, I'm glad you asked. We might see this illustration here and say, well, that's what you ought to do first. You should have done what your mom told you or what your wife told you. But truthfully, what the Buddha is asking for is this. He says, if you're going to follow the Eightfold Path, if you're going to be diligent about getting off the merry-go-round, so to speak, of reincarnation, then before you start, you need to think about who you hang out with. Who do you listen to? Who do you quote? Who are those best friends? What values are they espousing? Are they going to help you get to be where you need to be? Or are they going to hold you back? Are they going to set you back? Or are they going to be big temptations to you? So basically the Buddha is saying before you start this, pay attention to who your boys in the hood are. Pay attention to who your best friends are. Some of these friends you've had because you've known them all your life. The Buddha said, we're talking serious business here. How do you want to get off this cycle of reincarnation? You can do so, but you're first going to have to very carefully pick your friends and be with those, hang around with those persons who will help you be where you need to be.